The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And welcome to the RTÉ Rugby Podcast ahead of the opening round of the Heineken Champions Cup this weekend. Delighted to have Donal, Lenihan, Bernard Jackman and Liddy to go through the teams for the Irish provinces, their opponents, and I guess all news from the world of rugby. Gentlemen, you're very welcome, I should say. Donal, I think for the first time in my life, after 10 days in Dubai, I have a better tan than you do. What do you reckon about that?
Jesus, Hugh. I don't know what's after happening. What do they have to do to your hair? My mother used caught. Is that a cow's lick?
That's
your head.
It was a right Cork bazzer. I said, give us the finest Cork bazzer you could get me. So yeah, it's an old championship haircut. But you don't like it, no?
I'm very impressed. But for a fellow who gets who goes red at 18 degrees, I know you survived out in Dubai for 10 days.
I tell you, under an umbrella for most of it, factor 500 and they're walking around in the sunshine. But it was just, I guess, on the 7th itself, the Irish men's and the women's team were competing out there. It was the first two rounds of the season proper. The first tournament, it was back-to-back tournaments, took place behind closed doors. The second had the full crowd and all the works with it. The Irish men's and women's team probably didn't have a great time of it in terms of results. The men's made 2 quarterfinals, but they were beaten by Argentina in the first and by Australia in the second quarterfinal. The women's team just didn't perform perhaps as well as they want. But I guess the season's starting up again. I hate going off these sunny climates, lads, for a few days at a time in the depths of winter to go and report on the 7th. But somebody has to do it. And I'm the only one who put my hand up. So, whoever puts their hand up gets the rewards, and that's the way it goes. Delighted to be back and looking at your faces, though, I have to say. Ahead of the Champions Cup this weekend. Look, we'll kick off, Donal, I guess, and I heard yourself and Bert speak about this on Monday night and Against the Head, how difficult it's going to be for Munster in particular, given the COVID situation with South Africa, the travel, the supplementation of the squad now, the 22 players that have been added, most of whom are young, inexperienced, and even AIL players, ahead of Wasps this weekend. It's not an ideal situation, but I guess for the ECPR, Donal, and the organisers, it's vital that the tournament goes ahead this weekend, is it?
Well, look, they've made their points very clear. I mean, there is no wriggle room in the fixture list as we have it, but I think it dilutes the competition almost before we started. You have 4 teams who are severely compromised. You have Scarlets who pulled out already. The Munster team, it's still up in the air who's going to be available for Munster and that. And it's a pity because, look, it is a revamped tournament. There's only 4 pool matches now as opposed to 6, so the margin for error is that little bit tighter, even though there's only I think 8 teams go out after the pool stage. But because the way it goes, if you're out of it, if you've lost your first 2 games, it becomes very uncompetitive at the pool stage. So to have 4 teams who are severely compromised going into this opening round, it doesn't reflect well on the competition. I understand why we had it last year with COVID, where a number of games had to be called off. But this is a very unusual one. I mean, I've never seen a scenario before where various squads have up to 30 players unavailable for selection. And that really, I mean, you're talking about welfare, you're talking about issues with younger players coming in. You mentioned some of the players Munster registered in the 22. They wouldn't be regulars for their AIL clubs. Yeah. A lot of them are just straight out of school. I've played little or no rugby in the last 2 years. No, I don't think you're going to see any of those guys playing for Munster against Wasps. But it's just a pity for what is a fantastic tournament that it has to, it kicks off this weekend with a kind of a cloud hanging over it for me on the basis of the issues surrounding 4 of the participating teams.
Yeah, and if you want to just develop this a little bit, Bernard, looking at the ECPR and they're saying, okay, sympathy with them because they kind of have to get these games played. But is this just another hammer blow in the calendar that is the rugby congested fixture schedule? There's no room for manoeuvre if weekends come up like this. They have to get the matches played this weekend because there simply isn't another day to play them. And it's another stark reminder of just how congested this rugby season is for players.
Yeah, no, I actually do have sympathy for the ECPR. I've heard some people have a go off them for not rescheduling games and not being sympathetic. But as you say, they've nowhere to go. I mean, the URC has those spare weekends in the Six Nations, but the top 14 and the Gallagher Premiership run during that. So there is nowhere to go. And if they show leniency in any way, they're going to get caught later on because unfortunately there's no guarantee that there won't be some kind of outbreak of COVID in a squad, you know, in round 3 or round 4. Obviously, we won't have this South African trip, which has obviously caused the issue for Cardiff, for Munster, and for the Scarlets. But there is other things that can happen that can force teams to look for a postponement, and there is no gap. And then you see the matches, New Zealand, Wales, you know, the Baba, Samoa, that are thrown in outside the test window, and the problem that causes for international coaches, for club coaches in France to try and supply Samoa, for Ulster to give them Dwayne Vermeulen, for example, for the Babas. So the calendar is absolutely jam packed, and there's little or no wiggle room. Particularly, URC have a little bit of wiggle room because of the restructured competition. But when you're looking at, you know, the English clubs, the French clubs, and their domestic competitions, plus Europe, plus international rugby, it's very tight. And
I guess, Wes, the overall thing in the competition, before we go to the nitty gritty of the Irish teams for a second, is like, you know, just in terms of new structure of the competition as well. You know, if you lose your opening match, it's almost impossible, particularly away from home. It's almost impossible to recover, given you only have 4 matches within the pool stage to make the knockout. I know there is more teams qualifying for the knockout stages, but it puts an emphasis on winning your pool matches and starting off your campaign with the victory, which just puts more pressure on Munster this weekend.
Not sure, to be honest, Hugh. I think when there's 8 qualifying, I don't think losing the first match is necessarily detrimental at all. As far as the calendar stuff goes, I agree with Birch that there's no room, but it does seem to take a kind of needlessly antagonistic tone all the time, almost like a hardline position by the organisers, which I find a bit unusual when you consider the teams that they're facilitating or not are essentially part of their tournament, and their duty is as organisers is to engage with and look after their stakeholders rather than take some hardline position. And I always find, maybe it's just me, but ever since the split and the reformatting of the tournament, which obviously stemmed from discontent amongst English and French clubs, I do find that there's a real quickness to take up a kind of black and white position on anything, rather than maybe a desire to work together a little bit more sometimes. But I could be wrong in reading it that way, but I do feel that manifests itself sometimes. And equally, I think with the format, I think format changes generally, when they're so frequent, are damaging to a tournament, because it just leads to unfamiliarity with supporters, things like that. And I think the format chosen this year, maybe it was necessary, but I just think the idea where teams are being judged in a league system without going through the same fixtures essentially, where, you know, there's teams competing against each other in a league who have had a completely different program. It's almost in danger of becoming farcical, I think.
Do you agree with that, Donal?
Yeah, well, look, I think the structure when it changed, when it went down to 4 pool games, it's a bit unwieldy. In other words, like if you had the teams in your pool long ago, there was 3 other teams, you played them home and away. That was your 6 matches. Now, like Munster play Wasps, but Wasps play somebody else. Do you know what I mean? They don't all play the same teams in this new format. But look, if we could just take it one step back from there, the initial problem that we have, and we've spoken about it on the show before, it's a live issue with World Rugby, is A, there's too much rugby being played, and B, the sooner we get to a global calendar, the better. I mean, if anything, the COVID crisis going back 18 months, that should have been used as a tool that brought the unions closer together, given that they were all suffering major financial crises. And, you know, that was the time to knock heads together, get some agreement on a balanced global calendar. And, you know, given the physicality of the game, players should be playing less rugby, not more. And the fact that this is the major club tournament in Europe, and the fact that you don't have any wiggle room to allow for a very unusual scenario like we have now, I think it doesn't reflect well on the sport. And at some stage, they're going to have to bite the bullet, step back a bit, recognise that less is more in terms of the number of games that you play, and also try and get this balance. You know, we've seen the autumn internationals. We're all thrilled. Ireland did really well. But you saw the Southern Hemisphere teams. They've been going at it for so long. And to be fair, their competitiveness was impacted because of the bubbles that they were in. But we may be having the same conversation next June when Ireland go to New Zealand. So my point is the imbalance in the two times, the November window up here and the international window next summer, where your teams aren't playing each other on a level playing field. That is all as a consequence of not having a global calendar. And the sooner they get to that point, the better. But you know, it impacts directly on a brilliant tournament like the Heineken Cup.
But the commercialization, Donal, I guess, of particularly around Europe now, or around the CBC deal and their partnership with several of the leagues and their investment in rugby here means that they're going to want every, I guess, ounce of blood that they can get from the game. And I guess to add to that, then you have conflicting interests with the Southern Hemisphere who want their pound of flesh for everything they can get as well. And you have that perfect storm. It's going to be very difficult, isn't it, to kind of just unilaterally get an agreement across the board here.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, you know, because the venture capitalists are coming in and because there's more money in the game, playing more rugby is not the solution. It's not that type of game. It's a massively physical game. So, you know, they're going to have to find some way, some compromise. And I know we're digressing slightly from what we set out on. But and look, that's probably a pod in itself. But the realization has to come at some stage that these players, the attrition level is too high. They're now traveling all over the world. And that's why the Super Rugby has broken up. Players just couldn't put up with it anymore. Being involved in a tournament that involved 11 different time zones, it's fallen apart. And, you know, that was a consequence of extra money that came into the game, extra television rights, trying to involve Japan, trying to get Argentina involved. And that whole scenario has collapsed. And remember, that is the equivalent of our Heineken Cup, Super Rugby down there. And that's in a state of flux at the moment. So we need to be very careful. We have a very good product. The European Cup is the highlight of our club year, and we need to be careful how we manage it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, lads, we'll just go through, I guess, the respective fixtures, if you don't mind, involving the Irish provinces. So first up, Connacht against Stade and Leinster at home against Bath at the Aviva. Birch, Leinster, I guess, responded in the way that many thought they would after losing to Ulster, a bit of a kick in the behind for them by dismantling Connacht last weekend. Bath are on a 9-game losing streak, I think, at the moment. Stuart Hooper's position is under question. Bath have been linked with Johann van Graan, which we'll get back to a little bit later on this week. Do you see this as a pretty much a foregone conclusion as far as Leinster are concerned?
Yeah, and it's very hard to see. I've watched a good bit of Bath this year. They have a very good team on paper, and for sure, you know, if they got their act together, you know, they could be competitive, but they're in a really rough place. Don't seem to have any real backbone, and they're actively looking for a defence coach at the moment. It's a big issue for them. There's rumours they're looking for a head coach, and obviously Johann is being linked amongst others. So it's not ideal. We know what Leinster can do to, you know, Premiership teams in Dublin if they don't come, you know, fully ready. And you know, we've seen Northampton, we've seen Wasps take big beatings, and you know, I think Leinster got the wake-up call against Ulster 2 weeks ago, and will go out and be ruthless against Bath. So, yeah, I think it is a foregone conclusion, to be honest. And that's hard to say, given, as I said, the quality they have. But I haven't seen anything in those 9 games this year to make me think that they couldn't be competitive.
Here's Stuart Lancaster speaking to Mick Lennon of the RTÉ Rugby department ahead of the game against Bath. This is what he had to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, it's more about us than any other team. You know, when we come to Champions Cup, you know, the motivation for Leinster is always about trying to win every game. So we, you know, it's a cliche, but we will focus very much on ourselves and make sure that we've got our own preparation right. But I know myself, enough players at Bath, I know the coaching staff at Bath, and I know how hard they'll be working behind the scenes to turn around the run of results that they've had. You know, they've had some tight ones. Obviously, they'll be disappointed at the weekend. But they've had some tight ones, and I don't think they're a million miles off. And I know, well, Stuart Hooper used to be my captain at Leeds, so I know how hard he works, and Neil Hatley. I know them all very well. I know a lot of the players, so they'll be getting our full respect. And we'll prepare as well as we do for any of the Champions Cup opposition, you know, because for us, you know, we don't want to start the campaign with a poor performance. You know, we want to perform well. We're at the Aviva. We've got our fans coming in good numbers, great numbers, and we want to play well. So it's as simple as that, really.
Have you spoken about that there's no relegation obviously this year, and that in other years, had there been relegation, Bath may not focus as much on a first round European game given the position to find themselves in? Does that play into it at all?
Well, I mean, obviously their approach to the game will be very much dependent on them, but again, they'll be desperate to get a win, anyway, and they'll know that we'll have a good team, so they'll be preparing well. So for them, it's a massive game. For us, it's a massive game because we want to start off the campaign with a really strong performance to build on back last week's performance and get a win. But we know we're going to have to earn that right. And as I said, we did the Connacht review this morning, and we very quickly turned the page to Bath and looked at their key players, their threats, their playing style, the evolution, and we'll prepare 100% properly.
Was your overall when you did the review, was it a game of two halves or a game of 30 minutes and then 50 minutes in terms of what you were pleased with and what you maybe were frustrated with?
Well, I mean, I think you've got to give great credit to Connacht. I mean, I don't think people give Connacht the credit they deserve as a team. I think they beat Ulster fair and square. They probably should have won the Munster game, and they are an excellent attacking team. We had to be at our very best defensively. Certainly, it was hardest defensive challenge of the season by some margin, and it was great credit to them. So, in any game, you never get 100% right all the time. I don't think it was 30 and 50, as you've mentioned, to be honest. I thought it was spells of a little bit of inaccuracy by us, some very good play by them, but also supplemented by some excellent defensive sets by us and also some great attack. We scored 47 points against a team who we rate very highly, who were highly motivated. So we've got to be pleased with that. And I think it was a great stepping stone to get into Europe because it was exactly the type of game that we needed.
Leo said last week he wanted to see Harry in a big game, and he said obviously the Connacht game was a big game, but is there enough there that do you want to see him again in a big game that to see how his development is taken on another level, obviously in Champions Cup rugby?
Yeah, no, it's a competitive position though, isn't it? You've got his brother who's been excellent for us for a number of years now. You've got Johnny coming back, training at the end of the week, so it's a competitive position. I mean, the main thing that we focus on is getting the players to train effectively against each other, and that usually for me brings out form, fitness, and the cohesion and confidence that we need both in individuals and in the team. And Harry's not really had that opportunity, with injuries at the start of the season. Obviously, he was away with Ireland for a period of time. So what we're looking for from Harry is an extended run of uninterrupted training and games, and he'll be more than competitive and has the quality to put his hat in the ring for any selection for sure.
Okay, that was Stuart Lancaster there speaking to Mick ahead of Bath again. Harry Byrne, Wes, I didn't see the game against Connacht at the weekend, but
you thought Harry Byrne was excellent, though, did you?
I thought he was brilliant. I didn't see a minute of it, but I thought he should definitely start for Ireland Six Nations. Did you get to watch it? What did you make of his performance? Is he a bit like the racehorse, throughout the season, who's flattering to deceive? What's your view on Harry Byrne as potentially the next number 2 to Johnny Sexton at Leinster, at least?
He's probably, he might be back a step or two maybe from a couple of months ago. He had a couple of setbacks, I suppose, but I think it's still, like, it seems management still view Joey as number 2 or would like that to be the case. But I think it's very much open competition between 3 or 4 lads there. And look, it's great for Harry Byrne that he gets to step into another big European game, but as far as the game itself goes, I'd kind of go along with Birch. I think the only judgment to Leinster this year will come when they get down to that semi-final stage and possibly later in the tournament, and have they adapted enough to kind of deal with, some of the things that have tripped them up in the recent past, which, we saw against Aries, we saw against La Rochelle, coming up against bigger, more powerful teams. There's evidence that they have or that they're trying to, but equally, they kind of came a cropper only a couple of weeks ago against an Ulster team that attempted tactics like that. So yeah, it's I think it's reserved judgment on Leinster. It almost doesn't matter what they do, provided they progress until they get to that crunch stage.
I almost thought that Ulster, Donal, did them a favour last weekend by beating them, and I think there's no harm to have Leinster go out in their domestic league and getting turned over like that. It's been so used to just riding roughshod over teams week in week after that when they've come down to the big semi-finals or final games in Europe against the Saracens or be it La Rochelle or whatever, but they haven't been able to fire. So I think it's no harm that they get these tests in the league.
No, I agree with you, and I think there's probably private moments when Stuart Lancaster and Leo Cullen sit down over a coffee and they say, well, look, it's no harm that happened. That's exactly what we needed. You see, Leinster ran a hiding to nothing in so many ways because of the fact that they had 12 guys started against New Zealand for Ireland and Ireland beat New Zealand. Everybody now equates Leinster with Ireland. So it's very difficult for them. There's that expectation level hanging over them now every time they go out to play. And it's, I mean, I think it's often overlooked. I think Cullen has done an incredible job in the way that he has managed all of his resources. There's pockets of every season where he sees upwards of 15, 16 players taken out of his training regime, gone for periods of 4, 5, 6 weeks, and he gets a week to try and reintegrate them. So like that, while it's brilliant to have all this talent and all these individual players, managing that is a massive exercise. And by and large, over the years, I think he's done a brilliant job in doing that. So therefore, it's no harm that every now and then you do get a kick in the arse, which they got against Ulster. You flip that around. Ulster, after what happened them and their previous game against Connacht, if they didn't show up in the RDS against Leinster in that game, they might as well just give up for the year. Now, they got the reward, but they didn't back it up then against the Ospreys last week. But going back to Leinster, it is a difficult one because, as the lads have said, their real test will come. Like you can see them strolling through this pool stage. The round of 16 is home and away. You have to favour them to come through that. So therefore, it's in the last semi-final final. That's where Leinster will be tested. On the Harry Byrne thing, he reminds me. I've seen this over the years. He reminds me of the likes of JJ Hanrahan, even going back further, Jeremy Staunton, when they were given those games for Munster. Big, obvious talent that's there, but they play one game in 5. And sometimes you go in and you try too hard. He always seems to be forcing it for me. He was a bit like that when he came on against Argentina with Ireland, trying to give the $1 million pass all the time. There was an element of that the other night. He is a really talented player, but I think he just needs to just step back and relax and try and not play the $1 million play every time he has the ball in his hand.
I think he's feeling the pressure that I put on him, Donal. I think he's just really after I picked him up. I think he's just not able to deal with it.
Maybe he is, but look, you got to look. I mean, for me, Jack Carty had a way bigger influence on the game. Like poor old Jack Carty, he makes one mistake. I mean, there was a bad error at the start of the second half, and he kicked out on the full. Leinster subsequently score a minute later from that possession. But overall, I think Carty, he looks to me now as if he's kind of accepted where he is in some degree. He's been elevated to the captaincy of Connacht. He's playing, there's a bit of quality and a bit of confidence back in his game. And, he wants to be in that Ireland squad. For me, I think he's elevated himself to number 3 in that perch at the moment. And the likes of Harry Byrne, I think, deserve to be in the picture. But I just wish he'd relax a little bit more and not try and, prove himself every time he gets the ball in his hand. By way of contrast, his brother Ross, who is more experienced, he just looks that little bit more, he's not as stressed when he's playing. Yeah. And I think, look, it doesn't surprise me, a young fellow like Harry Byrne, who's been mentioned as, he is an Irish international now, he has to learn to live with that everyday pressure and just play his own game.
Connacht have to play Stad on Sunday, Birch, but they're without Bundy at key. I'm looking through this Stad pack that started against La Rochelle at the weekend. I think they were down at half-time, came back to win 25-20 against Rogers La Rochelle. So they're not going to be pushovers by any means. Coming to Galway, I don't know how much they're going to be up for it at the sports ground. I hate throwing this cliche out. We know what French team will turn up, how seriously to take it. But on the merits of the squad that they have, they're more than capable of going to Connacht and getting a result.
Yeah, they are. And that game against La Rochelle the weekend, they were 20 points to 6 down, I think, at halftime, or 20 points to 5, and they looked dead and buried, and they came out in the second half and just blew La Rochelle away, and that's kind of been how they've been all season. Now they haven't always come back, but they've had little glimpses of brilliance, and individually they have some serious quality. But I think I don't think they'll get that done at the weekend in the sports ground. I think they'll be clapping themselves on the back all week about how good they were against La Rochelle. They know they have no chance of winning Europe. You know what I mean? And they'll be looking to climb up the table. So I think they play Bristol the week after in Paris, and they may put up more of a show there. But I genuinely don't think. I think Connacht will beat Stade Francais, even though Stade are full of quality players. I think Connacht will ask them too many questions, and I don't think their mind is going to be completely honest.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? Like the way that French sides, as they do, you look at like Montpellier, prime examples over the years of a side that is little with talent and can go and do it, but do they really want to, and do they really believe that they can? And if they don't, I guess we'll tell a lot by the team selection, Bert, but it's a mindset thing, isn't it, with these French clubs as usual?
Yeah, and they'll definitely want to be good against Bristol the following week. That's a possible box office game for the Parisian public, and they'll respect Bristol a lot more, and maybe they'll think they can come to Connacht with a mixed team. But I think Connacht, the way Connacht are attacking at the moment, they'll score a lot of points against Stade Francais, and I'm not sure Stade will be able for it.
Saturday evening, then Ulster travel to Clermont. Wes, Dan McFarlane, I don't know what he makes of the fact that they can go out and put in that performance against Leinster the previous week and then lose to Ospreys at the weekend. It's that inconsistency, I know, that drives him mad. He said before this season, I can't remember after which game, that they're not very good when they go in as kind of favourites. Like, when they're expected to win, they just seem to, I don't know, shut up shop. But they're without Ian Henderson, it looks like, this weekend. We're not sure what the situation is with Johann van Graan. If he can play, obviously, fantastic boost against a tough Clermont pack. But they look a little bit light up front, I think is probably the best thing you can say about Ulster.
Yeah, definitely. Just watching the lads talking about it on Monday night and just looking at how their scrum has struggled in a couple of games recently, particularly at the weekend. Yeah, they're probably just short of a bit of quality up front. And I know Birch was saying there was trying to sign Stephen Kitchoff, but going away to Claremont. I know Munster kind of caught him on the hop last year, but it was, if not behind closed doors, but a very small crowd there. But I think it'll be a different story this weekend, and going up against the pack front row with Slimani and that there, it's going to be a big ask, you'd imagine, for Ulster, in fairness.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you alluded to the fact that Ian Henderson is out as well, Donal, and just that kind of to get over the gain line, which you have to do in Clermont to win the game. You have to have your ball carriers operating all cylinders to do it. So it looks a huge ask without. Now, if Vermeulen was to start, that'd be interesting, but we just don't know what the situation is there at the moment. He hasn't linked up with the squad yet.
No, he hasn't. I doubt if they'll rush him in there on Sunday. Look, you were talking about travel and Dubai and the beauty of European competition. I mean, the Stade Marcel Michelin is one of my favorite grounds across Europe. It's just, I presume they're back to full capacity in France now for these games. They are, yeah. So, I mean, it's a phenomenal place. It's a great city. They have a very young following there, but they're fanatic on their rugby. So look, Ulster, they are up against it. Henderson, for me, as I said, and against the head. Look, I just think he is the guy, and he's the cornerstone of that Ulster pack. When he's not there, they're just not the same. Now, having said that, Clermont, as we know, the great underachievers in Europe. I mean, I noticed they still have Camille Lopez and Morgan Parrott playing at halfback. JJ Hanrahan came on as a sub, I think, during the week. They don't quite have the quality that they had a number of years ago when they were kind of in the semi-finals and finals of Europe, but still you would imagine they'll be too good for Ulster on the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Munster, gents, on Sunday. It looks like Ian Costello is kind of front and centre. Obviously, he's a former Wasps coach, Bert. He's going to know a little bit more about his former club, which will be an advantage. But when you look at the squad makeup, we don't know, I guess, and it's very hard to comment because the likes of Conor Murray, Joey Carberry, Peter Mahoney, Ty Byrne, Dave Coyne, we're not sure if they're absolutely
they're 100% available. Yeah,
okay.
That's the only thing we are sure of. You, sorry.
Okay.
It's how they combine the others with that core group who luckily didn't get to South Africa for various different reasons. So yeah, no, they have the spine of a very good backline. they've they've Peter Manny, Tyg Byrne, and David Kilcoyne in the forward pack as household names. It's just where they find the rest, and there's a rumor that they'll tap into those guys who got home last week, who are in quarantine, to fill some of the bench spots, but also tap into the academy. So it's going to be a mix and match job, but there's going to be 12 or 13 players there who, if they were going out on a normal weekend in an ERC game for Munster, you wouldn't have any surprises. So, and Wasps are missing a lot of players. I watched Wasps Worcester last night. They lost. Wasps lost to Worcester. They aren't traveling well at all either. So, so it
sounds like you think Munster are actually they're not in as bad a position perhaps as being made out.
Definitely not. They're in a way better position than Cardiff, for example, who are going to play Toulouse this weekend. Look, it's far from ideal, but I genuinely believe that they can pull a win out of this, or if not a win, a losing bonus point. They have enough quality to ask questions of Wasps, in my opinion.
What do you make of the speculation around Bath and Johann van Graan? We know Van Graan, the last I heard of it, last I read of it, was that Van Graan was pretty close to agreeing a deal with Munster. We know Stephen Larkham now is leaving the end of the season. Bath and Stuart Hooper is under pressure. I mean, Johann van Graan to Bath, is that something that you're surprised at, Birch? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I did a bit of digging on it, and I was told there was no truth in it. But look, if they are actively looking for a head coach, he would be on a top 5 shortlist. Realistically, like, we look at his CV from an English club's point of view. Munster knocking around knockout stages every year, and has the ability. And also, if you look at his character and his personality, he's been very steady. There's no outbursts. There's no players leaving. He's a very steady type of character, and he's built up a decent track record of coaching without blowing the lights out. So he has a strong CV, because Munster, the reality is, if you coach Munster, other clubs get credit. Other clubs take confidence in the fact that Munster have given him that job. Do you know what I mean? And it hasn't gone terribly well, or hasn't gone terribly badly. It hasn't gone terribly badly either, to be honest. Like, it's just been where Munster should be. But Bath might say, well, look, there's the guy who understands Northern Hemisphere rugby now, has the capacity to recruit the likes of a Damien Delande or RG Snyman. That all helps as well. Your ability to attract big name players and keep big name players like Peter Manny, etc., Conor Murray, happy and content. So I can see why he would be on the shortlist. But yeah, I did a bit of digging on it, and it didn't seem to be. It certainly wasn't that he was like first choice and they're gonna break the bank to get him. But certainly would be in the top 5 for any job. I think any job in world rugby now, he'd be in a top 5 shortlist if he's available.
Well, maybe then, Wes, it's a case of the agent floating a few stories to try and get him more money. And if that's the case, so be it. Although I haven't seen too many Munster fans up in arms about the fact that they could potentially lose Johann van Graan here. I mean, if you wanted to go to Bath, and that was the case, would you be saying, good luck, off you go, thanks very much, and bring in somebody else?
I don't think losing 2 of your coaching staff in the one off season would be ideal. And I think that's going to make sure that there's a concerted effort to keep him as much as anything else. But
why?
Well, I just don't think that's the way they operate. I don't think they like making wholesale changes. I think it's quite a conservative environment in Ireland. I think it's safety first. I think the idea of losing 2 senior people wouldn't be part of the plan. I think the fact that Stephen Larkham is leaving is possibly an indicator that Johann will be there as a head coach for another while. And I think Johann's very well got at IRFU level as well. So I'd be surprised if he left, to be honest.
Would you, Donal?
Yeah, I would. I don't think there's any question of him leaving Munster to go to Bath. I think if he's leaving Munster, he'll go back to South Africa. I think it would be, like as Wes said, if Munster lost Larkham and Van Graan in the same year, given the turnover of coaches, like having lost Erasmus and Dean Arbor together, having lost Jerry Flannery and Felix Jones together, what does it say about the structure and the organisation within the province? Van Graan, look, he hasn't set the house alight. There is indications, or there was, up to recently that, you know, Munster may have turned the corner. But to be fair to him, this setback, like whatever happens on Sunday, and we all know you can get up for it, and there'll be, you can imagine Peter O'Mahony bringing those young fellas together in training during the week, just it's backs to the wall, it's galvanised stuff, it's typical old Munster with 2 chips on the shoulder, going over. They're not going over now till Sunday morning. And the reason for that is, as Birch has alluded to, the guys who came home last week, their quarantine period is up at 12 at midnight on Saturday night. So by virtue of the fact that they're now flying out Sunday morning, suggests to me that yes, there will be 3 or 4 guys that they'll take a chance with and put on the bench. So look, that's in relation to Sunday. But on the wider issue, I think it would reflect very badly if Van Graan was to leave Munster to go to Bath. I just don't see it happening. I don't know where this story has come from.
Right. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Absolutely. Right, lads. Just one last point before we wrap it up, and we can briefly enough on this one. And Bert, I might get your thoughts on it. Lavanini's 5-week suspension for the hit on Cian Healy during the November internationals almost seemed to kind of fly a little bit under the radar. I was reading about it over the weekend. 5-week ban for a hit like that could have a serious impact on Cian Healy's long-term health. You know, just the nature of the hit, how exposed he was, the size of the player doing it, his previous record, his 3 red cards, the fact that they contested the actual decision in the first place to say this wasn't a red card, and the mitigation that was subsequently provided on the sentence to bring it down to 5 weeks, all seems to me to be absolutely bizarre. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think the disciplinary committee have missed an opportunity here to lay down a marker and actually probably help Lavanini long term, because these shortish suspensions haven't worked for him. Like at some stage he needs a long time out of the game to really, I suppose, sort himself out. It's just too consistent, and it has been since he joined Racing 92 as a 19-20-year-old in Leicester for the Jaguares for Argentina. It's just his disciplinary record is appalling, and an act of violence like that, I think it should have been 3 months minimum, to be honest, because that's the only way he's going to learn. And to be honest with you, like Claremont signed him for the physicality he brings. So clubs want physicality from him, but unfortunately he keeps overstepping the mark. But I don't think the sanctions are, and this sanction is too short in my opinion. 5 weeks, Donal. It's hardly a deterrent, is it?
It's a joke. I mean, it's ridiculous. You and I, we were in the commentary box before the match. I was looking at Lavanini in the warm-up, and then you saw the tears streaming down. And to be fair, he's an incredibly passionate man. He loves playing for Argentina. Every time you see him playing for Argentina and the anthems, the tears are rolling down his face. But a bulb went off in my head when I looked at him in the warm-up. I said, this fella, he's too hyped up again. And I just checked literally a minute before kickoff what his record was at international rugby. And I wrote down 7 yellows and 2 reds. Now, I didn't look up his club one. That was a different one. But the minute he hit Cian Healy, it was the most straightforward red card of all time. How in the name of God they could have contested the fact that it was a red card? And I know from being involved in disciplinary situations, maybe working with players, there's 2 ways you go in. One is you accept the card that was issued by the referee and you work from there in terms of mitigating circumstance. The other is you contest the red card. Now, when you go down contesting the referee's decision, you go into a whole other extreme altogether. So the fact that he contested it from the outset, to me, would have said, geez, they're going to throw the book at him here. And they didn't. But I think his like, as I said, it was up to that game, it was 7 yellows and 2 red at international level. So that gave him another red. I think his club record at the time was 7 or 8 yellows and another red. So, I mean, it is phenomenal.
Yeah, that kind of hit, Wes, is normal and acceptable down where the cookies and the young Munsters. But for everybody else, it's pretty shocking stuff. You know what I mean? Even you have to agree that kind of thing's not acceptable for everybody else.
Yeah, the sun in Dubai must be gone to your head. You're even more stupid than usual this week. As the definition of a recidivist, I think he was lucky to get off with 5 weeks for sure.
Absolutely. Well, look, gents, it's been a pleasure. Enjoy the matches this weekend. Live coverage on RTÉ1 Radio and online as well, with updates from all the 4 Irish provinces in Europe. We wish them the best of luck. We'll be back next week to review it all ahead of the second round. My thanks to Donal, to Bernard, and to Wesley. Talk to you next week.
The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.